I discovered the HOA's little secret completely by accident on a Tuesday morning in December, when I noticed steam rising from the community center's heating vents while smoke poured from my own chimney. My name is Ethan Winters, and I had been living in Pleasant Ridge Estates, a gated community just outside Boulder, Colorado, for 3 years. The mountain air was crisp, the views were stunning, and the neighbors mostly kept to themselves. That is, until Patricia Brennan took over as HOA president and decided to make my wood-burning stove her personal mission. It started with a letter slipped under my door. The envelope was cream-colored with the HOA logo embossed in gold, and inside was a single page of typed text informing me that wood smoke had been deemed a health hazard and environmental concern. All wood-burning fireplaces and stoves would be banned effective immediately. Residents had 30 days to comply or face fines of $500 per day. I read the letter twice, standing in my entryway, still holding my morning coffee. My cabin-style home had been built with a gorgeous stone fireplace and a high-efficiency wood stove that I used as my primary heat source during Colorado winters. The electric baseboard heaters were backup only, far too expensive to run constantly when temperatures dropped below freezing. I had specifically bought this house because of its wood stove and the way the previous owner had modified the ductwork to circulate warm air throughout the entire 3,000 square foot space. The next morning, I walked to the community center for the monthly HOA meeting. The building was a modern structure with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Flatirons. Inside, about 20 residents sat in folding chairs arranged in neat rows. Patricia stood at the front, a woman in her early 50s with a sharp blonde bob and a pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. She was flanked by 2 other board members, Gregory Hunt, a retired accountant who always looked nervous, and Deanne Sheffield, who nodded along with everything Patricia said. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately launched into her presentation about air quality. She had charts printed on poster board showing particulate matter levels and respiratory health statistics. None of the data was specific to our community, but she presented it as if Pleasant Ridge Estates was suffering a public health crisis. Wood smoke contains over 200 chemical compounds, Patricia said, tapping her pointer against a chart, including formaldehyde, benzene, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. This is not just an inconvenience. This is a serious health threat to everyone in our community. I raised my hand. How many homes in Pleasant Ridge actually use wood heat? Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. That's not the point, Ethan. It seems relevant, I said. If we're talking about a health crisis, we should know the scope. Gregory shuffled some papers. According to our records, 4 homes have wood-burning stoves or fireplaces that are regularly used. 4 homes out of 62, I said. And mine is the only one using it as primary heat. The others are decorative. Nevertheless, Patricia said, her voice sharpening, the board has voted and the decision is final. All wood burning must cease. An older gentleman named Frank Martinez spoke up from the back. Did we vote on this? I don't remember getting a ballot. The board voted, Patricia clarified. That's how our bylaws work. The board makes decisions on behalf of the community. I had read those bylaws front to back when I purchased my home. The bylaws also say residents can petition for a community-wide vote on any board decision. We need signatures from 20% of homeowners. Patricia's jaw tightened. If you want to waste everyone's time with that process, be my guest, but the ban stands until proven otherwise. I left that meeting and spent the next week knocking on doors. Most of my neighbors were sympathetic but unwilling to get involved. Some were afraid of retaliation from Patricia, who had a reputation for making life difficult for anyone who crossed her. Others just didn't care enough about an issue that didn't directly affect them. By the end of the week, I had 11 signatures. I needed 13. I was 3 short. That evening, I sat in my living room with the wood stove crackling, knowing I had only 2 weeks left before the ban took effect. The electric heat would cost me an additional $300 to $400 per month through winter. Money I didn't exactly have lying around. I worked as a freelance software developer, and while I made decent money, Colorado wasn't cheap. The next morning, I decided to do some investigating. I had always wondered why the community center seemed so warm despite its size. The building had to be at least 8,000 square feet, with high ceilings and those massive windows. Heating it should have cost a fortune, but our HOA fees never reflected those costs. I walked over around lunchtime when I knew Patricia would be there. She practically lived in her office, a converted storage room at the back of the building. I entered through the front door, waving at Susan, the part-time receptionist who worked 3 days a week. "Just grabbing some forms," I said casually, heading toward the bulletin board near the entrance. Susan barely looked up from her computer. I took my time pretending to read various notices about pool hours and landscaping schedules. Then I wandered toward the back hallway, where offices and utility rooms were located. The building was old enough that the heating system wasn't exactly modern. I followed the sound of rushing air to a mechanical room with a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." I tested the handle. Unlocked. Inside, I found a large furnace system, but what caught my attention was the ductwork. Thick, insulated pipes ran along the ceiling and disappeared through the wall. I followed them with my eyes, trying to trace their path. They seemed to angle toward the residential area of the community. That's when I noticed something else: a secondary heating system. A massive heat exchanger connected to what looked like external ductwork. I pulled out my phone and took several photos, trying to understand the setup. The system was clearly pulling heat from somewhere outside the building. "Can I help you?" I turned to find Patricia standing in the doorway, arms crossed. "Just trying to understand our heating system," I said, "since you're so concerned about efficiency and environmental impact. This area is off limits to residents." "Why?" "We pay for everything in this building through our HOA fees. I think we have a right to know how our money is being spent." Patricia stepped closer. Her perfume was overwhelming in the small space. "The heating system is none of your concern. What is your concern is that wood-burning ban going into effect in 12 days. I suggest you start making other arrangements." I held up my phone, showing her one of the photos I had just taken. "Where does this external ductwork lead?" Her face went pale. "Get out. Now." I left the mechanical room, but my mind was racing. Something wasn't adding up. That night, I sat at my computer and started pulling up property records, utility bills, and building permits. It took me 3 hours of searching through county records, but I finally found what I was looking for. 5 years ago, when the community center underwent major renovations, permits had been filed for a supplemental heating system utilizing renewable energy sources. The permits included ductwork installation connecting multiple properties to a central heating distribution point. I cross-referenced the addresses and felt my stomach drop. The ductwork connected to my house, and the 3 other homes with wood-burning stoves. They had been siphoning heat from our chimneys to warm the community center. I sat back in my chair, stunned. The system was actually ingenious from an engineering standpoint. The heat exchangers captured excess heat from our flue gases, heat that would otherwise escape into the atmosphere, and redirected it through insulated ductwork to the community center. We had essentially been providing free heating to an 8,000 square foot building without even knowing it. No wonder Patricia was so desperate to keep wood burning. But if that was the case, why ban it now? I spent the next day talking to the other 3 homeowners with fireplaces. Tom and Linda Chen had a decorative fireplace they used maybe twice a year. The Hendersons had moved to Florida for the winter and wouldn't be back until March. But Martha Reynolds, a widow in her 70s who lived 2 streets over, told me something interesting. Patricia came by last month, Martha said, inviting me into her kitchen. She offered to pay my heating bills if I switched to electric, said the HOA had a new green energy initiative. Did you take the offer? Of course. I can't afford to heat this big house on my pension. If the HOA wants to pay, why would I say no? I thanked Martha and left, my theory crystallizing. Patricia knew exactly how valuable our wood heat was. She had been trying to get the other homeowners to switch voluntarily by offering to subsidize their costs. But I was different. I relied on wood heat by choice and necessity. She couldn't bribe me because the cost would be too high, and my stove ran nearly 24 hours a day during winter. I was the primary heat source for that entire community center. The ban wasn't about health or environment. It was a power play. By forcing me to stop burning wood, Patricia would eliminate the one homeowner she couldn't control. Then she would reverse the ban, probably claiming new air filtration technology or some other excuse, and offer to help me switch back by paying for my wood. The HOA would be in complete control of our heat source, and she would have leverage over me. But I had no way to prove any of this. The heating system was legal according to the permits. We had all unknowingly agreed to it when we signed our HOA documents, buried in subsection 12 of paragraph 6, under shared resources and community benefits. I had read that section a dozen times and never understood what it meant until now. With 8 days until the ban took effect, I made a decision. If they were going to force my hand, I would give them exactly what they wanted, consequences and all. I called a propane company the next morning. The technician arrived that afternoon to give me an estimate on converting my wood stove to propane. He was a cheerful man named Rodriguez who had been working with heating systems for 30 years. "You sure you want to make this switch?" he asked, examining my setup. "You've got a really efficient wood stove here. Propane will run you about $200 a month, maybe more in deep winter." "I don't have a choice. HOA banned wood burning." Rodriguez shook his head. "HOA, I swear they cause more problems than they solve." "All right, I can have you set up in 3 days. I will need to pull permits and inspect the flue, but it's a straightforward conversion." The installation happened on a Friday. Rodriguez and his assistant worked for about 6 hours, installing the propane tank behind my house, running new gas lines and converting the stove. By evening, I had a fully functional propane heating system. "You're all set," Rodriguez said, handing me an information packet. "Tank should last you about 6 weeks at moderate use. We can set up automatic delivery if you want." I thanked him and paid the installation fee, watching my savings account take a significant hit. But I knew it would be worth it. The temperature dropped that night. A cold front moved through Colorado, pushing temperatures down to 15 degrees. I turned on my propane stove and felt the familiar warmth fill my house. But somewhere in the community center, things were about to get very cold. I didn't hear anything over the weekend, but Monday morning brought another letter from Patricia. This one was much shorter and much less professional. "Ethan, we need to discuss your heating situation immediately. Please come to the community center at 2 this afternoon. This is not optional." I arrived at exactly 2 and found Patricia waiting in her office, along with Gregory and Deanne. Patricia looked frazzled, her usual perfect appearance marred by dark circles under her eyes. "The community center lost heat this weekend," she said without preamble. "Our heating bills are going to triple." "That's unfortunate," I said, "but I don't see what it has to do with me." "Don't play games, Ethan. You know exactly what this has to do with you." "Do I? Because last I checked, I followed your ban to the letter. No more wood smoke. I switched to propane, just like you wanted." Patricia's hands clenched on her desk. "You knew we were using supplemental heat from your chimney." "Did I? Because I don't recall anyone ever mentioning that to me. In fact, when I bought this house, nobody said anything about my heating system being connected to community infrastructure." Gregory shifted uncomfortably. "It's in the bylaws. In subsection 12 of paragraph 6, buried under vague language about shared resources." Any reasonable person would assume that meant the pool, tennis courts, and playground, not that the HOA was secretly siphoning heat from my chimney. Deanne spoke up for the first time. "We're going to have to rescind the wood-burning ban." "No," Patricia snapped. "We can't look like we're backing down." "We don't have a choice," Deanne said. "The heating bill for this building will bankrupt us. We don't have the reserves to cover $3,000 to $4,000 a month in additional heating costs." I leaned back in my chair. "Sounds like a real problem." "Have you considered being honest with homeowners about why you really wanted that ban?" "This is extortion," Patricia said. "No, this is consequences. You tried to manipulate me into doing what you wanted without explaining why. You used HOA authority to serve your own interests instead of being transparent with the community. And now you're stuck." "What do you want?" Patricia asked, her voice tight. "An apology would be nice. And full disclosure to every homeowner about how the community center heating system actually works. And I want it in writing that I'm under no obligation to provide heat to this building. If I choose to use wood, that's my business. If I choose to use propane, same thing. The HOA doesn't get to dictate my heating choices based on whether or not it benefits your budget." Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but Gregory cut in. "That seems fair." "Fair," Patricia turned on him. "We'll lose our leverage." "What leverage?" Gregory said. "We never had leverage. We had a secret arrangement that nobody understood, and it just blew up in our faces. Ethan is right. We should have been honest from the beginning." The meeting ended with no resolution. Patricia refused to back down, and I refused to switch back to wood unless my terms were met. I went home and kept my propane stove running, comfortable and warm, while the community center struggled with inadequate heating. 2 days later, I got a call from Martha Reynolds. "Ethan, dear, I think you should know something. Patricia came by again yesterday. She tried to convince me to start burning wood in my fireplace. Said the ban was being revised due to new research." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I was perfectly happy with electric heat, especially since the HOA is paying for it. She got very upset and left." I thanked Martha and hung up, realizing Patricia was getting desperate. Without my wood heat, the community center was hemorrhaging money. She had probably already burned through any contingency funds trying to cover the heating bills. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week. I marked it on my calendar, curious to see how Patricia would try to spin this situation. But 3 days before the meeting, something interesting happened. I received a certified letter from Gregory Hunt, not from the HOA, but from Gregory personally. Inside was a resignation letter and a confession. In the letter, Gregory explained that he had been uncomfortable with the wood-burning ban from the beginning. He had reviewed the community center's finances and discovered that Patricia had been manipulating the budget for years. The Green Energy Initiative, she claimed to have used to pay Martha's heating bills. That money had come from the reserve fund, which was supposed to be used only for emergency repairs. Patricia had been dipping into reserves for months to cover various pet projects, including extensive landscaping around her own property, which she claimed was improving community aesthetics. The heating crisis had simply exposed the larger problem. The HOA was nearly broke, and Patricia had been cooking the books to hide it. Gregory's letter ended with a plea for me to attend the next meeting and bring this information to light. He was too afraid of legal repercussions to do it himself, but he thought the community deserved to know. I spent the next 2 days digging through every financial document I could access. As a homeowner, I had the right to request HOA financial records, and I submitted a formal request immediately. Patricia tried to delay, claiming the documents needed to be prepared, but Colorado law required HOAs to provide financial records within 10 business days. I received them with 1 day to spare before the meeting. The records confirmed everything Gregory had written. Patricia had spent nearly $40,000 from the reserve fund over the past 18 months. Some expenses were legitimate but questionable. Others were outright fraudulent. She had approved paying her own landscaping company to work on HOA property at inflated rates. She had purchased furniture for the community center from her sister's store at twice the market price. And she had been pocketing small amounts here and there, never enough to trigger an immediate red flag, but totaling over $8,000. The wood-burning ban had been her attempt to cut costs after realizing the budget was spiraling out of control. If she could eliminate the free heat source and then force me to provide it again under HOA control, she could reduce expenses while maintaining her other questionable spending. I printed everything and organized it into a presentation. Then I called Frank Martinez, the older gentleman who had questioned the ban at the first meeting, and several other homeowners who had expressed concerns. I invited them to come early to the next meeting for a pre-meeting discussion. The day of the meeting arrived with fresh snow on the ground. I arrived an hour early, carrying a box of documents and my laptop. Frank and 6 other homeowners were already there, gathering in a corner of the main room. I laid everything out for them. The heat siphoning system, Patricia's financial mismanagement, the depleted reserves, and the attempted cover-up. By the time I finished, Frank looked furious. "We need to call for an emergency vote," he said. "The board needs to be removed." "We need evidence of wrongdoing first," said a woman named Jennifer Cole, who worked as a paralegal. "What we have is concerning, but we need to present it properly." Patricia arrived 15 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to start. She saw our group and immediately knew something was wrong. Her face hardened, but she walked to the front of the room and began setting up for the meeting as if nothing was happening. When the meeting officially started, nearly 40 homeowners were present, far more than usual. Word had spread that something significant was happening. Patricia called the meeting to order and started to go through routine business, but Frank interrupted. "Point of order. I move that we table regular business and address community concerns about HOA finances and recent board decisions." "That's not on the agenda," Patricia said. "I'm making it the agenda," Frank replied. "I have a right to raise concerns, and I have 7 homeowners who second my motion." Patricia's jaw clenched, but she couldn't deny the motion. "Fine. What concerns?" I stood up, carrying my laptop. "I would like to present evidence of financial mismanagement and potential fraud involving HOA funds." The room went silent. Patricia's face went white, then red. "This is inappropriate. If you have concerns, you should submit them to the board in writing." "I did," I said, 2 weeks ago. "You ignored them, so now I'm bringing them to the community." Jennifer Cole stood up. As a homeowner and someone with legal training, I believe Ethan has the right to present his findings. If there's nothing to hide, the board should welcome transparency. Patricia looked trapped. Deanne shifted nervously beside her. Gregory, of course, wasn't there. I connected my laptop to the projector and began walking through the financial documents. I showed the depletion of reserves, the questionable expenses, and the pattern of self-dealing. I explained the heat siphoning system and how the wood-burning ban was really about covering up budget shortfalls. Homeowners started asking questions. Voices rose. Deanne tried to defend some of the expenses, but she clearly hadn't known the full extent of Patricia's actions. Patricia finally stood up. This is a witch hunt. Ethan is angry because he didn't get his way with the wood-burning ban. He's making wild accusations. These aren't accusations, I said. These are your own financial records. Every number I've shown comes directly from documents you're required to maintain and share with homeowners. You're taking things out of context, Patricia said, her voice shaking with anger or fear. I couldn't tell which. Frank stood up. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current HOA board, and I move to freeze all HOA spending until a full financial audit can be conducted. The motion was seconded immediately. Patricia tried to argue that the motion was out of order, but Jennifer cited the relevant sections of Colorado HOA law and our specific bylaws. The vote proceeded. 41 homeowners voted in favor. 2 voted against. Patricia had lost. The next 2 hours were chaotic. A temporary board was formed consisting of Frank, Jennifer, and a retired banker named Robert Chen. They immediately voted to suspend Patricia's access to HOA accounts and building facilities. Diane resigned on the spot, claiming she had no knowledge of Patricia's actions and didn't want to be involved. Patricia stormed out of the meeting, threatening lawsuits, but the real work was just beginning. Frank contacted a forensic accountant to conduct a full audit. The accountant, a stern woman named Dr. Rebecca Nash, took 3 weeks to go through every transaction from the past 5 years. During those 3 weeks, the community was in an uproar. Some homeowners defended Patricia, saying we were overreacting. Others demanded criminal charges. I mostly stayed out of it, focusing on my own life and work. I switched back to wood heat, and the community center's heating costs dropped immediately. The temporary board approved a small increase in HOA fees to cover the gap until they could figure out a long-term solution. Dr. Nash's report arrived in late January. It was worse than anyone had expected. Patricia had embezzled over $63,000 over 5 years through various schemes. Some of it was blatant theft, but much of it was hidden in legitimate-looking transactions. She had been careful, almost clever, but not quite careful enough. The temporary board voted unanimously to file charges with the Boulder County District Attorney's Office. The DA took the case seriously, especially given the amount of money involved and the number of victims. Patricia was charged with theft, fraud, and embezzlement. I didn't attend the preliminary hearings. I had said what I needed to say and provided the evidence I had uncovered, but Frank kept me updated. Patricia had hired an expensive lawyer who tried to argue that the charges were based on accounting errors and misunderstandings. The DA wasn't buying it. The case moved slowly through the system, as these things do. But in early March, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of theft and 2 counts of fraud. In exchange for avoiding prison time, she agreed to full restitution of the stolen money, 5 years of probation, and community service. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. The restitution came from a combination of Patricia's personal assets and her homeowner's insurance, which covered some of the fraud. The HOA eventually recovered about $48,000, not everything but enough to replenish the reserves and cover the costs of the audit and legal fees. By April, Pleasant Ridge Estates had a new permanent board. Frank became president, despite saying he was too old for the responsibility. Jennifer took over as treasurer, implementing strict financial controls and transparency measures. Robert handled maintenance and grounds. One of their first actions was to officially disconnect the heat siphoning system from my home and the other residences. They offered to pay me a fair monthly rate if I wanted to continue providing heat to the community center, but I declined. Instead, the board invested in a high-efficiency heat pump system for the building, which reduced heating costs by 40% compared to the old setup. The wood-burning ban was officially repealed. New guidelines were put in place about proper stove maintenance and emissions, but they were reasonable and based on actual environmental standards rather than budget manipulation. Things slowly returned to normal. The community came together in a way it hadn't before. People paid more attention to HOA meetings. Financial reports were posted monthly and reviewed carefully. The culture of rubber stamping whatever the board wanted was replaced with actual oversight and engagement. I ran into Martha Reynolds at the grocery store in May. She was doing much better, no longer worried about Patricia's manipulations. "I heard you're the hero of Pleasant Ridge," she said with a warm smile. "I'm not a hero, I just didn't like being lied to." Well, sometimes that's what heroes do. They stand up when everyone else is too afraid or too complacent. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone who had accidentally uncovered a mess and then felt obligated to clean it up. But the community was better for it. Our HOA fees were more reasonable. Our reserves were being rebuilt. And most importantly, we had transparency and accountability. On a cool evening in late May, I sat on my back deck, watching the sun set over the flatirons. My wood stove was silent now that spring had arrived, but I knew it would be ready when winter returned. And this time, I would be burning wood for myself, on my own terms, without someone else secretly benefiting while trying to control my choices. Frank stopped by the next day with news that made me laugh. The community center's new heat pump system was so efficient that the HOA was actually saving money compared to the old setup, even without the siphoned heat. If Patricia had just invested in proper equipment, instead of trying to maintain a secret arrangement, none of this would have happened. "She got greedy," Frank said, shaking his head. "If she had just done her job honestly, she could have still been in charge. Instead, she's got a criminal record and owes us $48,000. You think she'll actually pay it all back?" The lawyers seem to think so. "Her husband has money. They're selling some investment properties to cover it, but even if we never see another dime, it was worth it to expose what was happening." I agreed. The money mattered, but the principle mattered more. HOAs exist to serve homeowners, not to give petty tyrants a platform for control and self-enrichment. What happened at Pleasant Ridge Estates was a reminder that oversight and transparency aren't just bureaucratic buzzwords. They're essential protections against abuse of power. In June, I attended a community barbecue at the center. It was the first purely social event we had held in years, with no agenda, no business, just neighbors getting to know each other. Kids played in the pool while adults grilled burgers and shared stories. Jennifer found me near the drink table. "I wanted to thank you again for everything you did. I know it wasn't easy. It needed to happen. Still, you could have just switched to propane and kept quiet. Most people would have, maybe, but I'm stubborn, and I really hate being manipulated," she laughed. "Well, Your stubborn streak saved this community a lot of ongoing problems. Patricia was getting worse. If you hadn't exposed her, who knows how much more she would have stolen. The summer passed peacefully. I worked on my projects, enjoyed the mountain weather, and appreciated living in a community that finally felt functional. The temporary drama of the Patricia situation faded into the background, becoming one of those stories neighbors would tell newcomers. Did you hear about what happened with the old HOA president? In September, I got an email from Rodriguez, the propane technician who had converted my stove. He wanted to let me know that my system could easily be converted back to wood if I ever wanted to switch again. I thanked him but said I was already back to burning wood. "Good for you," he wrote back. "Nothing beats real wood heat, and nothing beats standing up to an HOA that's out of control." As fall arrived and temperatures began to drop, I split and stacked wood in my backyard, preparing for another winter. The rhythm of the work was satisfying, and knowing that every piece of wood I split would warm my home, and only my home made it even better. The first snow came in October, earlier than usual. I lit my wood stove and felt the familiar warmth spread through my house. No one was siphoning that heat anymore. No one was trying to control me through manipulation and hidden agendas. I was just a homeowner, living in my house, making my own choices. That evening, I walked to the community center for a board meeting. Attendance was still high, a lingering effect of the drama earlier in the year. Frank ran the meeting efficiently, covering actual community business without drama or hidden agendas. We discussed snow removal contracts, pool maintenance for next year, and whether to install electric vehicle charging stations in the parking area. When the meeting ended, Frank pulled me aside. "The DA's office called today. Patricia made her final restitution payment. We're whole again, at least financially." "That's good news." "It is, and I wanted you to know that the board is setting up a new policy. Any HOA decision that affects individual homeowner property rights has to be put to a community vote. No more board deciding things in secret." "That seems smart." "It's because of you. What you went through made us realize how much power we were giving to just 3 people. It's too much for anyone to have without oversight." I left that meeting feeling genuinely good about my community for the first time since moving in. Pleasant Ridge Estates wasn't perfect. We still had the usual HOA nonsense about fence heights and mailbox colors. But the big stuff, the important stuff about money and power and control, was being handled properly now. Winter settled in fully by November. My wood stove ran constantly, keeping my house warm while snow piled up outside. The community center's heat pump hummed away efficiently, keeping the building comfortable without relying on anyone's secret contributions. And Patricia Brennan was somewhere else, probably still bitter about how everything had fallen apart, serving her community service hours and making restitution payments. I never saw her again. She and her husband sold their house in Pleasant Ridge and moved away, unable to face the neighbors she had stolen from. Someone told me they moved to Arizona, starting fresh where no one knew their story. On Christmas Eve, the community held a holiday party at the center. Families gathered, kids ran around hyped up on cookies, and adults shared hot chocolate and conversation. I stood near the windows, looking out at the snow-covered mountains, and thought about how different everything was from a year ago. A year ago, I had been unknowingly providing free heat while Patricia secretly planned her wood-burning ban. A year ago, the community had been sleepwalking through HOA meetings, trusting without verifying. A year ago, things had seemed fine on the surface while rot spread underneath. Now things were genuinely fine, not perfect but honest, And that made all the difference. Frank approached with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. You look contemplative, just thinking about how much has changed. You started quite the revolution with that propane conversion. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to keep my house warm without someone controlling me. Sometimes that's how revolutions start. One person saying enough and actually meaning it. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching kids play while snow fell outside. Pleasant Ridge Estates was finally what it was supposed to be. A community of homeowners working together for mutual benefit, with transparency, accountability, and respect for individual rights. The wood-burning ban that Patricia had implemented with such certainty was now a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority. The heat siphoning system that had seemed so clever was now seen as the deceptive scheme it always was. And the HOA that had operated in shadows was now functioning in the light, better for everyone involved. As January arrived, bringing the coldest temperatures of the winter, I sat in my living room with my wood stove blazing. My house was warm, my heating bills were reasonable, and I had no one to answer to but myself. The propane system sat idle, ready if I ever needed it, but I preferred the wood. Always had. My phone buzzed with a message from the HOA group chat that Jennifer had set up for better communication. It was Frank, letting everyone know that the parking lot would be plowed by morning and reminding everyone about the upcoming annual meeting where we would vote on the budget for next year. That annual meeting happened in early February. Every homeowner received a detailed budget breakdown weeks in advance. Questions were encouraged, debate was welcomed, and when the vote came, we all knew exactly what we were voting for. The budget passed with minimal changes. HOA fees would increase by $12 per month to account for inflation and the new heat pump system's maintenance costs. Everyone understood the numbers. Everyone agreed it was fair. There were no secrets, no hidden agendas, and no one trying to manipulate the community for personal gain. After the meeting, several neighbors thanked me again for exposing Patricia. I deflected the praise, but I understood why they felt grateful. Living under a corrupt HOA is like living with a constant low-level stress. You don't always notice it, but it affects everything. Once that stress is removed, the relief is palpable. March brought warmer weather and the promise of spring. I began using my wood stove less frequently, letting the electric baseboards handle the milder nights. My woodpile had lasted through the winter with some to spare, which I covered and left for next year. One afternoon, I received a letter from the district attorney's office. It was a formal notification that Patricia's probation was proceeding as expected. All restitution had been paid, and the case was considered resolved. The letter thanked me for my cooperation and contribution to the investigation. I filed the letter away, a final bookend to the whole situation. Patricia had faced consequences for her actions. The community had recovered financially and structurally, and I had learned valuable lessons about the importance of paying attention to how power is exercised, even in something as seemingly mundane as a homeowner association. Spring fully emerged by April, and with it came a new energy to Pleasant Ridge Estates. The new board organized work parties to spruce up common areas. Neighbors who had barely spoken before were now friends. The community had been through something difficult together and emerged stronger. I spent a Saturday helping Frank install new benches near the playground. As we worked, he told me about his plans to run for another term as president, but only if someone else would agree to be vice president to share the workload. Why not Jennifer? I asked. She's considering it. But I was actually thinking of asking you. I hammered in a bolt before responding. I don't think I'm cut out for HOA politics. You're exactly cut out for it. You understand that the board serves the community, not the other way around. That's the most important qualification. I thought about it. A year ago, I would have said absolutely not. But now, after everything that had happened, I understood how important it was to have people involved who genuinely cared about doing things right. Let me think about it, I said. That's all I ask. By May, Pleasant Ridge Estates was barely recognizable from the troubled community it had been 15 months earlier. The transformation wasn't dramatic or flashy. It was subtle, built on small improvements compounding over time. Better communication, more transparency, actual community engagement. These things mattered more than anyone realized. I eventually agreed to run for vice president, though I told Frank I was only committing to 1 year. The election was uncontested since most people were happy with how the current board was operating. I won by default, which seemed fitting somehow. My first board meeting in an official capacity was strange. I sat at the front table instead of in the audience, looking at the same faces I had been among just months before. We discussed routine business, approved some minor expenditures, and planned the summer pool schedule. It was boring in the best possible way. After the meeting, Jennifer and I stayed late to organize some files. "You know what the best part of all this is?" she asked. "What's that?" Patricia thought she was so clever with that wood-burning ban. She thought she could manipulate you into doing what she wanted, and no one would figure it out. Instead, her own cleverness was her downfall. If she had just been honest from the beginning, she probably could have negotiated a deal with you and the other wood-burning homeowners. Maybe paid you a small stipend for the supplemental heat or something. "Pride comes before a fall," I said. Exactly. She was so convinced of her own superiority that she couldn't imagine anyone outsmarting her. But you did, just by being honest and standing your ground. As summer arrived, I settled into my dual role as homeowner and board member. It was less work than I expected because Frank, Jennifer, and Robert were all competent, reasonable people who divided responsibilities fairly. The board met twice a month, and most meetings lasted less than an hour. The wood stove sat cold through summer, as it should. I spent time hiking in the mountains, working on my software projects and enjoying the Colorado sunshine. The drama of the previous year felt distant now, almost like it had happened to someone else. But every time I walked past the community center and saw the heat pump unit humming away efficiently, I was reminded of how much had changed. That building had once been heated partly by my unwitting contribution, controlled by someone who thought she could manipulate an entire community for personal gain. Now it was heated by equipment the community had chosen, paid for fairly through transparent budgets. In August, I received a message from Gregory Hunt. He had moved away shortly after resigning, too embarrassed to face his neighbors. His message was short. "I saw that Patricia completed her restitution. I'm glad the community recovered from everything. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to speak up sooner. What you did mattered." I wrote back thanking him for his original letter, which had started everything. Without his confession and the documents he provided, I might never have uncovered the full extent of Patricia's schemes. Fall arrived again, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of changing leaves. I began preparing my wood supply for another winter, splitting logs and stacking them in neat rows behind my house. The work was meditative, and I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened since that first letter under my door. A simple ban on wood burning had unraveled an entire web of corruption. My stubborn refusal to comply without understanding why had exposed financial fraud and led to criminal charges. And a community that had been sleepwalking through HOA governance was now engaged and active. The first freeze came in October, and I lit my wood stove for the first time in months. The familiar crackle and warmth filled my house, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This heat was mine, generated by my labor, controlled by my choices. No one was taking it without my knowledge. No one was manipulating me through hidden systems and secret arrangements. At the October board meeting, Frank announced he wouldn't be running for president again next year. He was getting older, and while he had enjoyed helping rebuild the HOA's reputation, he wanted to step back and let younger residents take over. "I think Jennifer should be the next president," he said, "and Ethan should move up to treasurer. Robert can stay on as maintenance director if he's willing." The room murmured approval. Jennifer looked surprised but pleased. I felt a moment of panic at the thought of more responsibility, but then I remembered why I had agreed to serve in the first place. Communities need people who care, and I had proven I cared enough to fight for what was right. The election would be in January. Until then, we continued managing the usual HOA business. We approved the snow removal contract for winter, discussed whether to allow holiday decorations on common areas, and reviewed bids for repainting the community center exterior next spring. It was boring, routine work. And it was exactly what an HOA should be doing. Winter's first real snow came in November, heavy and wet, covering everything in white. My wood stove ran constantly, keeping my house warm while winds howled outside. I thought about Patricia occasionally, wondering if she ever reflected on her choices or if she simply felt like a victim of circumstances. I hoped she had learned something, but I doubted it. People like Patricia rarely admit fault, even when consequences force them to face reality. She had probably convinced herself that she was unfairly targeted, that her actions weren't really wrong, that everyone else was overreacting. But the $48,000 she had to repay told a different story. The criminal record she now carried told a different story. And the community she could never be part of again told the truest story of all. December brought the holiday party again, now an annual tradition that everyone looked forward to. I stood in the same spot by the windows where I had stood a year before, watching snow fall and kids play. But this time, I wasn't contemplating how much had changed. I was simply enjoying the moment, appreciating a community that finally functioned as it should. Frank joined me with hot chocolate, repeating our tradition from the previous year. "A year ago, you were thinking about revolutions. You remember that. I pay attention. So what are you thinking about now? How normal everything feels. How that's actually a good thing." Frank nodded. "Normal is underrated. People don't appreciate boring competence until they've experienced dramatic incompetence." We stood there watching the party, comfortable in the knowledge that Pleasant Ridge Estates was finally, genuinely okay. Not perfect, but honest. Not exciting, but functional. Not controlled by a petty tyrant, but governed by reasonable people serving their neighbors. The wood-burning ban that had started everything was now just a story we told, a reminder of what could go wrong when power goes unchecked. The propane conversion that had exposed the truth sat unused in my basement, ready if ever needed but unnecessary for now. And I continued burning wood through that winter, and every winter after, warming my house and only my house, comfortable in the knowledge that I had stood my ground when it mattered and helped create lasting change in my community. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance lead to the biggest transformations. Sometimes refusing to comply with an unjust rule exposes injustice far beyond that single issue. And sometimes a stubborn homeowner with a wood stove can change an entire community simply by saying no and meaning it. That was my story, the story of how an HOA banned firewood smoke, how I switched to propane, and how they lost their free heat source. But more importantly, it was the story of how a community lost its corruption and found its integrity again, all because one person refused to be controlled without understanding why.